All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're exploring a story that might just flip the script on how you see the founding of America. It's a story about staggering wealth, global power, and a trade that's been, well, pretty much written out of the history books.
So let's just start with a massive, kind of provocative question, right? What if the very foundation of Western civilization was actually rooted in the drug trade? I mean, that's a concept from Dr. Ammon Hillman, and it's a pretty stunning place to begin our journey.
The source material we're looking at today doesn't pull any punches. It calls this idea a bold and destructive claim. That's some really strong language, and honestly, it perfectly sets the stage for a story that's going to challenge a lot of what we think we know about history.
Now, that first question was about all of Western civilization, but for today, we're going to zoom in. The core argument here is that for the United States, specifically between 1763 and 1865, the opium trade wasn't just some sideshow. Nope, it was the main event. It was a force that literally created, sustained, and in the end, forced the entire reorganization of the American Republic.
So, a story that big, where do you even start? How do you unpack that? Well, the source suggests that this massive, global history actually becomes a whole lot clearer when you see it through the life of one single extraordinary person. What I find really fascinating about this is how it reframes the whole narrative. See, the source argues that historians have kind of gotten this wrong. On the left, you've got the story we're all familiar with: revolution, liberty, founding fathers, political ideals. But on the right is the argument we're exploring today: a history driven by global trade, ruthless merchants, and the cold, hard economic realities of building an empire. It's a completely different lens.
And the key that unlocks this whole hidden history? The person at the very center of this economic storm? His name is Thomas Handasyd Perkins. And to really get his impact, you have to understand the incredible scale he was working on.
Perkins wasn't just, a successful guy. The source calls him a merchant prince. And what that means is somebody who gained a level of power and influence that was, well, almost unimaginable. We're talking about the kind of wealth that could shape the destiny of a new country, way beyond what we think of as just a successful entrepreneur today.
So, what was the engine behind all this power? What fueled this incredible rise? Well, that brings us right to the heart of it: the China opium trade.
Now, when you hear opium trade, your mind probably jumps to two things, right? The British Empire, who were famously running the show, or the devastating impact it had on China. But the source we're digging into today argues that the single most important and most ignored part of this whole story is the role America played.
And this really shows that America's role was anything but small. American merchants didn't just join in, they actually pioneered how these drug markets were developed. We're talking creating new supply chains from places like Turkey, building these complex smuggling networks. They basically wrote the playbook for the international drug trade. They moved huge quantities of opium, became a massive global player, and their actions directly fueled instability and conflict around the world.
Okay, so America was a huge player. Got it. But how does that actually connect back to the creation of the country itself? Let's look at how this trade didn't just make a few guys rich, but how it literally helped forge the new American Republic.
This timeline is wow. It just lays it all out so clearly. I mean, think about it. Perkins's life covers the entire critical, formative period of the U.S. He's born as one empire is ending, and his business is woven into the American Revolution. His ships were supplying crucial goods to the army. During the War of 1812, he's navigating global conflicts to keep his trade routes profitable. By the 1820s, his wealth and influence are at their absolute peak, shaping the national economy. And it goes all the way to the Civil War, which completely reshaped the very nation his trade helped build.
So here's the bottom line. The massive profits from the opium trade were not on the sidelines of American history. According to this source, this money was a primary force. And we're not talking about abstract wealth sitting in a vault. This was the capital that founded some of America's first hospitals, universities, and museums. It funded the railroads that opened up the West. This money was actively put to work, shaping policy and building the very infrastructure of the new nation. Which, of course, leads to one gigantic question. If this story is so fundamental to understanding the United States, why on earth isn't it common knowledge? And that brings us to our final section, a deliberately forgotten story. The mystery really starts with the man himself. Despite being one of its main architects, Thomas Handasyd Perkins has been, as the source puts it, nearly erased from the story of the opium trade. And it's not like nobody tried to preserve his legacy. In fact, his own nephew, a guy named Robert Bennett Forbes, actively tried to get people to remember the momentous deeds that were built on this trade money. He wrote letters, he tried to cement his uncle's place in history, and the response he got? Crickets. A deafening silence. The source says his letters were met with little or no reply. So this wasn't just people forgetting over time, it was a cold shoulder. It really points to a conscious choice to just let this story die.
And get this, the erasure was an active thing, even inside his own family. The source points out that other descendants, like John Murray Forbes, also had zero interest in honoring Perkins. The very people you'd expect to carry the torch were helping to bury the story.
And so, that's where we'll leave it. The story of Thomas Handasyd Perkins isn't just about a missing chapter, it feels more like a chapter that was intentionally ripped out of the book. And that leaves us with one last pretty provocative question to think about. If a story this big was left out, what else are we missing?